Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to talk to you about Mozart's very greatest, I mean greatest, which means the greatest of all time, chamber pieces. I'm referring to the string quintets, not the quartets, the quintets. The string quintet that Mozart invented was a completely unique creation for him. Up until about the 1780s, which is when most of Mozart's were written. There's an early one, Kershel 174 in B flat major, which is quite lovely, but not in the same class as the later five. And those were written for two violins, two violas, and cello. The only real competition in the quintet universe, at least as far as we're concerned today, came from Luigi Boccherini, a vastly, I have to tell you, vastly underrated composer, but who wrote billions of string quintets for two violins, viola, and two cellos. And Mozart liked violas, and he wrote 5 mature string quintets. 3 of them more or less as a set, and 2 later ones. No one knows quite why he wrote them. They were not written to commission. He tried to publish the first 3 by subscription, meaning he wrote them on spec. He didn't have a market for them offhand and tried to sell them himself. Clearly, he was motivated by some sort of musical desire to see what he could do with the medium. And of course, when Mozart was motivated by a musical desire to see what he could do with the medium, amazing things happened. I mean, always. I want to start by talking about the works individually, just so you get a sense of how remarkable they are. Let me just say generally that I think one of the reasons these pieces are so marvelous is because they're quintets, because Mozart has an extra instrument to play with. You'll recall that, remember that scene in Amadeus where the emperor says that Mozart's music has too many notes? Remember that business? We all laugh at him. Ha ha, what a jerk. He thinks Mozart has too many notes. Mozart does have too many notes. Let's not kid ourselves. He was a very musical guy. The aristocracy in those days were all very musical. A lot of them were composers. They knew what they were listening to, and they knew what they liked. Mozart's music is bigger, meaning longer, larger, more complex, more intricate, more full of music than any other composer who had come before him, except possibly Haydn, who was working on a smaller scale somewhat in terms of his handling of forms. Mozart liked notey music. Let's just be honest about it. And this sometimes caused some problems. For example, I am not a huge fan of his last 3 string quartets. Beautiful though they are, and we have to acknowledge their musical greatness. But when dealing with 4 instruments, there's always a tendency, always, to overwrite, to keep them all busy all the time, just to show that you have 4 instruments and you can make them all equal and you can do that sort of thing. Haydn never fell into that trap. Haydn understood, for example, that the quartet was not just a piece for everybody playing everything all the time as independently as possible. It was actually a series of solos and duets and trios and combinations within the quartet medium. And Mozart, it took him a while to get to that. In his quartets dedicated to Haydn, he gets it. In his later works, I think he gets a little bit obsessed with the idea of creating a sort of contrapuntal balance between all the instruments, and the result sounds to me notey, a little bit overly busy. But with the quintets, we're in a different world because Mozart has that extra viola, and it makes all the difference. He doesn't have to worry so much about giving everybody something to do all the time, about creating that sense of balance and fullness of texture. 5 instruments gives you fullness of texture automatically. You can create 4-note chords while the other instrument has the melody. You have more opportunities for creating the kind of rich, luscious textures that Mozart just adored. It was more congenial to his way of thinking. And that's why I think the string quintets are his greatest chamber works. They not only have all of the contrapuntal interest and developmental interest and formal beauty and expressive intensity of his string quartets, but they're a little bit more relaxed and colorful. He actually luxuriates in the sound and the texture. And Mozart was so fascinated by color and timbre and texture, and he gets that in his quintets in a way that the string quartets make more difficult. So I really think the best of him in terms of chamber music is in his 5 quintets. Now the first this is Kershel 406, I'm just reading this thing here, is in C minor. And it's a transcription. It's a transcription of a divertimento, the divertimento number 12, I believe it is, for wind octet, which is also in C minor. And I have to say that brilliant as this is as a quintet, and it's completely rewritten for the quintet medium, you'd never know that it was anything else. When you hear the wind version, I like the wind version because it just sounds more evil. The music when written for winds, especially when you have trills, in the themes, which you do here, they just sound more sinister when woodwind instruments play them than when violins play them. But it's a great work, and of course it's in Mozart's, it's C minor. I mean, Mozart, in the minor is always very, very expressive. It's very intense minor. And the reason is because he had a certain tonal economy. Most music in the period, if it starts in the minor, had to end in the major, but Mozart doesn't do that. Mozart, in his recapitulations, keeps things in the minor, and the result gives the music a seriousness and a darkness and an emotional undercurrent that goes a long way to creating those romantic and demonic qualities in Mozart that later generations treasured so highly. So the quintet in C minor is a wonderful work, but if you really want to hear how that music can go, and I'll give it a whole nother dimension, listen to the divertimento version for wind octet. Next we have the quintet in C major, which is Kershel 515. This is one of the pair that Mozart wrote to have published by subscription, and the reason he transcribed the C minor wind octet, because you needed to have at least 3 or 6 works to publish as a set when you came out with one of these things. Now the C major quintet is a big work, especially its first movement. Mozart, like I said, was a notey composer, and his music was extremely expansive for the day. Most people didn't have any more of an attention span than we do now, and to have to listen, it's 33, 34 minutes long. It's a big work, just a big work. And it's not big because, he's indulging in all kinds of abstruse developments and crazy things. It's because it's so full of melody. The first movement particularly has an exposition that's it's just chock full of beautiful themes. And I think that, it's really almost unprecedented in terms of its size as a sonata form kind of structure that Mozart was creating. It's just a wonderful work. And what's interesting is that we're generally taught, those of you who play piano, C major is your basic vanilla key, right? It's the easiest one. It's all white keys. That's not how Haydn and Mozart and Schubert, the classicists, thought of it. They thought of C major kind of as a blank slate, which meant they were free to do all kinds of other interesting things harmonically within the basic C major key. And that's what happens in this quintet. It's that kind of a work. It's very adventuresome. It's quite wonderful. But next comes, here we go, the G minor. It's probably the saddest and grimmest piece that Mozart ever wrote. It really is astonishing. The first movement in particular has a kind of claustrophobic intensity. It paces around like a caged animal. And the reason is, again, that tonal economy. The reason is because both the first subject and the second subject stay in the home key of G minor. G minor, of course, was Mozart's personal minor key. It was the key of the great G minor symphony, Kershel 550, and other moments when he wanted to express the most intense emotion. He always turned to G minor. And in that first movement, he writes very simple themes, but they're repeated, and there's an obsessiveness that's very disturbing, especially the second subject, which is just da 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 dum, ba da da dum, bum ba da da dum, bum bum. and it repeats that way. And it's just, there's something that reminds me, quite frankly, of Alan Pedersen's Eighth Symphony that I talked about in another video, where just a very simple minor key interval is repeated obsessively in a way that's just enormously disturbing. And actually, all four movements of this quintet are deeply, deeply sad. The minuet is not a cheerful minuet at all. The slow movement is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly sorrowful. And the finale is sort of fascinating. It's an opera buffa type finale. It begins with a lament for the solo violin in a way that Mozart never would have written in a quartet. He never would have. And, I talk about this a bit in my book on Mozart's instrumental music, which I could hold up and show you, but believe me, I wrote one, and try it if you're interested. But, it's an operatic scene, essentially, for solo violin, after which the music reaches a depth of despair which is so profound that the only way he can finish it is to ignore it completely and turn into the major and do one of his sort of zippy finale things. It's very similar to what he does in the D minor piano concerto too. There's that sense of, I can't go any further along, the lines of minor key hopelessness. I have to cheer it up somehow. And so he does. And that has caused people to accuse him of a facile superficiality. But I think that the emotional progression is absolutely right. It's absolutely right, given where he's taken the music and where it wants to go. The G minor quintet is just, one of those pieces that nobody but Mozart could have written the way he did. And it's one of the monuments of Western civilization in all respects. Then comes the quintet in D major here, which is probably the most sort of intellectual of the five big ones. It's full of really interesting and intricate writing for all five instruments, and the developments are fun to follow. And when I say intricate and intellectual, I don't mean cold. I mean fun. I mean there's it keeps your mind engaged. It's like a good crossword puzzle or something that you do to while the time away in the most pleasurable way possible, always keeping yourself interested. And finally, there's the last one, the E flat major quintet. And the E flat major quintet, I think, is really Mozart's tribute to Haydn, who he adored and who was the master of the string quartet, really the unsurpassed master of the string quartet. And I don't give a damn about what anybody else wrote later. Nobody wrote quartets as well as Haydn did. But this quintet has all kinds of Haydnesque features, the humor and the wit, and especially the finale. It's a rondo finale that, the slow movement is a theme and variations. It does all of the things that Haydn's very, very famous chamber music was doing, and sounds a lot like him in places. It's a very, very jolly piece and a wonderful way to end the whole series. It's Kershel 614. I think it was Mozart's second to last major chamber work. It was written at the very end of his life. And so these works are, encapsulate everything that's best about the mature Mozart. And, if I had to be I talk about these fly on the wall moments we'd all have wanted to see. Wouldn't you have just given anything, I mean anything, to have been at the home of Mozart's friend hearing the premiere of the G minor quintet with Haydn and Mozart playing the viola parts in the quintet? And that was a moment. There was a moment when they did that. These guys got together and played the damn quintet. And God, what a wonderful thing it would have been to have been there. Probably a little smelly because they didn't have like deodorant and toilet paper in those days, and they were sweating, and you had to get used to the olfactory element, and the fact that they all had smallpox, and what I mean. But musically, what an incredible thing it must have been. So now, those are the quintets. I talk about them at such length because the music it's just so extraordinary, and we all have to have a few dozen sets, and I'm going to talk about them. There are a couple of classic sets made by the Budapest String Quartet, which I have sitting over in the big pile over there, that my colleague Dan Davis at ClassicsToday.com just loves and recommends very highly. They're very, very beautiful, very warm in that lovely Central European style. And if you like the Budapest Quartet, by all means, go for them. But I'm going to talk about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sets of quintets. 5 more, because we have 5 instruments, so 5 sets. There are a lot more, I know. There are lots of them. But these, I think, are really terrific sets. The first is on Hyperion with the Nash Ensemble. You may have missed this one when it came out because it's with an ensemble, not with a quartet with an extra viola player. But these are beautiful, beautiful, beautifully recorded, elegant performances, full of fire and grace and all of the things that we love in Mozart. Now, one of the things that keeps these pieces a little bit less popular than perhaps they should have been, other kind of connoisseurs pieces, even though they shouldn't be really, is the fact that the quintet form was never regularly constituted. It's either 2 cellos, as with like Boccherini and Schubert later, or 2 violas, as Mozart did it, and Dvorak and Brahms, and Mendelssohn. So you can't. There are no regularly constituted ensembles that are quintets, and the repertoire is very small. It's a couple of dozen pieces for viola quintets, right? So you can't make a living playing viola quintets, running around doing the couple of dozen existing worthy works. And that's one of the reasons they're not played as frequently as they should be. But at least they get recorded all the time. The next set, a modern set that I think is quite exceptional, is this one, the Orlando Quartet with violist Nabucco Imai on bis. This is coupled with the Quintet for Piano and Winds with the Berlin Philharmonic Wind Quintet, and the Clarinet Quintet with Martin Frost, which is the Vertavo String Quartet. And let's see, and the Quintet in E5 Major for horn, violin, 2 violas, and cello with Ensemble Villa Musica. This is a big set, but you get all of the 6 string quintets as well, wonderfully played by the Orlando Quartet, amazingly well recorded, and Nabucco Imai, the violist, she also did them with the Auren Quartet on Tatchet. And those are also excellent performances. She was evidently the Mozart quintet violist on call to handle all of these things. And it's a wonderful set on bis records, and that's also worth considering if you're looking for Mozart quintets. Now, a classic version is this one, which has been boxed up separately since the day, but this is the Juilliard Quartet. And here they are on this old junky Odyssey cheapy, we don't know what we have or what its value is reissue. They've since been boxed up with the Haydn, the quartets dedicated to Haydn. But the Juilliard Quartet is really a wonderful group for that sort of, they were almost proto-period instruments because their tempos are swift, the rhythms are sharp, the textures are just a little bit more acerbic. Of course, the intonation is absolutely perfect, which you often don't find in period instrument performances. And by the way, there are no great period instrument performances of this music, at least not yet. And this is a great set, an absolutely great set. It also, this version of it also has the Clarinet Quintet with the Marlborough Ensemble and Harold Wright, which is also terrific. However, there are 2 sets that are classic sets that you must have that really should get your Mozart string quintet collection going. The first is, of course, the Grumio Trio as a quintet with extra people. And, Arthur Grumio's Mozart was a miracle in itself. His violin concertos are wonderful. And the Grumio Trio, they also did the Divertimento at E-flat major, which is in here, that the greatest string trio ever written in the history of mankind. And you get all the quintets, and they are exceptionally beautiful performances. This is Phillips, which is now Decca, and this shouldn't be too hard to find. So if you got to start someplace, the Grumio Trio's quintets are one of the places to start. And the other is the Taluk Quartet. The Taluk Quartet with Karel Rehak, second viola. This is on La Dolce Volta. It is an extraordinary set. It always has been. You know, the Taluk was one of the great Czech quartets, along with the Smetana Quartet and the tradition that was continued with groups like the Pinocchio Quartet. This is absolutely gorgeous. It was originally issued on Calliope in France, and it has since been, that catalog has been taken over by La Dolce Volta, reissued at an extremely favorable price, and folks, you can't go wrong. It's absolutely glorious. So if you're going to start your string quintets, you go with Grumio and Taluk, maybe with Juilliard as a follow-up. If you want modern digital sound, the Nash Ensemble, the Orlando Quartet, the Alrin Quartet are all first rate. The Nash Ensemble is terrific. We're spoiled for choice in Mozart's quintets, which is a good thing because they are as great as anything that Mozart ever did. And that's the truth. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me for this chat. Please, if you liked it, subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the best.